Ambassador Cathvar adjusted his environmental suit for the third time in as many minutes, the familiar weight of his translation matrix humming against his chitinous neck. The corridors of Nexus Station had never felt so imposing, their gleaming surfaces reflecting the nervous energy of representatives from across the galaxy. Today marked the first formal contact with the species from Sol TF-3, the death world that had somehow produced a civilization capable of faster-than-light travel. The preliminary reports had been disturbing enough, a world where the very atmosphere was toxic to most known life forms, where liquid dihydrogen monoxide fell from the sky in destructive storms, where massive creatures roamed lands that shifted and cracked with tectonic fury. That anything could evolve intelligence in such conditions defied conventional wisdom. That they had reached the stars while still confined to their single world spoke to either remarkable determination or dangerous instability. Cathvar had voted for caution in the Galactic Council's preliminary sessions. His own species, the Zeftai, had learned long ago that aggression was a luxury the civilized galaxy could not afford. Wars had become ritualized affairs, conducted through economic sanctions and political maneuvering. Physical violence was the domain of primitives and the criminally insane. The human delegation arrived precisely on schedule, their ship docking with mechanical precision that impressed even the notoriously punctual Nexari. Cathvar had studied the recordings of their vessel dozens of times, noting its unusual design philosophy. Where most civilized ships prioritized efficiency and aesthetic beauty, the human craft appeared functional to the point of brutality. Its hull bore scars that suggested regular repair, and its weapon ports were neither hidden nor decorative. The airlock cycled, and Cathvar got his first direct look at humanity. They were smaller than expected, bipedal and remarkably uniform in basic structure. Their leader, introduced as Secretary General Martinez, stood barely 2 meters tall, her frame appearing almost fragile compared to Cathvar's own bulk, yet something in her movements, the way she carried herself, suggested a coiled energy that made him unconsciously step back. Honored representatives, Secretary General Martinez said, her translator rendering her words in perfectly accented galactic standard. We come in peace, seeking friendship and mutual understanding. The words were standard diplomatic protocol, but Cathvar found himself studying her eyes as she spoke. Humans, he had learned, were unusual among sapient species, in that they retained visible sclera, making their gaze direction obvious. Martinez was looking directly at each representative as she spoke, and when those eyes met his, he felt an unexpected chill. The formal presentations proceeded according to established protocol. Each major civilization offered greetings and brief cultural overviews. The ethereal collective spoke of their transcendence beyond physical form. The builders demonstrated their mastery of stellar engineering. The Nexari displayed their mathematical precision in all things. Each presentation reinforced the galaxy's commitment to peaceful coexistence and the abandonment of primitive violent impulses. When humanity's turn came, Martinez stepped forward with what she identified as a cultural exchange presentation. The holographic display that materialized behind her showed Earth in stunning detail. Blue oceans beneath swirling white clouds, green and brown land masses that seemed almost impossibly lush compared to the sterile perfection of most civilized worlds. Humanity, Martinez began, has always been defined by our challenges. Our world taught us that comfort is temporary, that survival requires constant vigilance, and that cooperation in the face of adversity is the foundation of all progress. The images shifted, showing human cities that sprawled across continents, massive structures that seemed to grow organically from the landscape rather than imposing order upon it. Cathvar noted with interest that many of these cities bore visible signs of damage and repair, as if they had been regularly destroyed and rebuilt. We have faced extinction 17 times in our recorded history, Martinez continued, her tone matter of fact. Ice ages, volcanic eruptions, asteroid impacts, plague, famine, and war. Each time, we adapted. Each time, we grew stronger. The hologram now displayed something that made several representatives recoil visibly. Humans in primitive armor, carrying crude weapons standing over the bodies of enormous predators. The creatures were easily 3 times the size of a human, with claws and teeth that could have dismembered a Nexari in seconds. Our ancestors hunted megafauna to extinction using nothing but sharpened sticks and coordinated pack tactics. When that food source disappeared, we learned to cultivate crops and domesticate other species. When the climate changed, we built shelters and developed technology. When resources became scarce, we fought for them. The word fought seemed to hang in the air longer than the others. Cathvar noticed that several of the more peaceful species had begun showing signs of distress. The harmonious were cycling through warning colors, and the Nexari representative had begun the rapid mathematics of anxiety. But perhaps most importantly, Martinez said, we learned to fight together. Human history is the history of warfare, but it is also the history of cooperation, on a scale that would have been impossible for our individualistic ancestors. Now the hologram showed something even more disturbing. Human armies in perfect formation, millions of individuals moving with synchronized precision. The images cycled through different eras, showing the evolution of human military technology, from bronze spears to projectile weapons, to energy systems that rivaled anything the galaxy had seen. We understand that many galactic civilizations have moved beyond physical conflict, Martinez said. And Kethvar caught what he thought might be a slight smile. This is admirable, and we respect your achievement. However, we have learned that peace is not the absence of war. Peace is what you have when you are better at war than anyone else. The silence that followed was profound. Kethvar felt his respiratory spiracles cycling rapidly as he processed the implications of what he had just heard. The humans were not merely admitting to a violent past, they were presenting it as a fundamental aspect of their culture. Ambassador Thys of the Ethereal Collective was the first to respond, his energy form flickering with what Kethvar recognized as diplomatic concern. Secretary General Martinez, while we appreciate your candor about your species' history, surely you understand that such primitive impulses have no place in civilized galactic society. Violence is the hallmark of species that have not yet evolved beyond their base instincts. Martinez turned to face Thys directly, and Kethvar saw that smile again, broader now and somehow more unsettling. Ambassador Thys, with respect, I think you misunderstand our position. We have not moved beyond our capacity for violence because we have learned that such capacity is not a flaw to be corrected. It is a tool to be perfected. The hologram behind her changed again, now showing detailed schematics of human military technology. Kethvar's knowledge of weapon systems was limited, but even he could recognize the sophisticated lethality of the designs. Kinetic weapons that could punch through planetary shields, energy systems that could glass continents, and something labeled planet crackers that made his exoskeleton contract with fear. We have studied the available galactic histories, Martinez continued, and we have observed a disturbing pattern. Every few thousand cycles, a species emerges that has not abandoned its capacity for violence. The devourer swarms, the machine consciousness, the entropy cult. Each time, the civilized galaxy responds with shock and horror, as if violence itself were an extinct concept. Each time, billions die before the threat is contained. She gestured to the weapons display, her expression growing serious. We propose an alternative approach. Humanity will serve as the galaxy's immune system. We will be the violence that civilized species cannot stomach, the sword that peaceful species cannot wield, the guardians who ensure that your peace remains possible. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Representatives began speaking over each other, their translators creating a cacophony of outrage and fear. Ambassador Thys's energy form flared bright enough to trigger the chamber's protective filters. The Harmonia shifted to deep red warning patterns, while the builders began calculations for immediate defensive construction. You propose to hold the galaxy hostage, accused Representative Koth of the builders, to make yourselves indispensable through the threat of force. Martinez waited for the noise to subside before responding, her voice calm and steady. Representative Koth, we propose nothing more than what we have always done. We will protect those who cannot protect themselves, and we will eliminate threats that peaceful species cannot face. The only difference is that we are offering our services openly, rather than allowing you to discover our capabilities during a crisis. Kethvar found himself speaking before he realized he intended to. And if we refuse your offer, if the galaxy chooses not to accept humanity as its immune system? The smile disappeared from Martinez's face, and for a moment Kethvar saw something in her eyes that made him understand why ancient prey animals had evolved to fear predators even in the dark. Ambassador Kethvar, that is entirely your choice. We will return to our system and continue our development in isolation. But understand this. The next time a devourer swarm emerges from dark space, or an AI rebellion threatens organic life, or some other existential threat appears, we will not intervene. You will face it with the tools your peaceful civilizations have developed. She paused, letting that sink in. And when your peace proves insufficient to protect itself, we will still be here, on our death world, perfecting the arts of war that you have abandoned. The galaxy's choice is not whether humanity will be violent. The galaxy's choice is whether humanity's violence will serve you, or remain indifferent to your fate. The session ended in chaos, with representatives from dozens of species demanding immediate emergency councils. As the chamber emptied, HFY found himself alone with the human delegation. Martinez approached him directly, and he forced himself to remain still despite every instinct screaming for him to flee. "Ambassador HFY," she said, "your species has a reputation for wisdom. What is your assessment of humanity's proposal?" HFY's spiracles cycled slowly as he considered his words. "Secretary General Martinez, I believe you have just offered the galaxy the choice between protection and extinction. What disturbs me is that I cannot determine which option humanity represents." Martinez nodded, as if his confusion were perfectly reasonable. "Ambassador, humanity learned long ago that those two things are often the same. The strong protect the weak not out of altruism, but because a galaxy full of corpses serves no one's interests." As the human delegation departed, HFY remained in the chamber, staring at the darkened holographic display where images of human warfare had painted pictures of such casual brutality. He thought about his own species' history, of the wars they had abandoned in favor of diplomatic solutions, of the weapons they had dismantled in favor of tools of creation. For the first time in his diplomatic career, HFY began to wonder if his ancestors had made a mistake. The galaxy was vast and dark, full of things that did not respond to negotiation or reason. Perhaps there was wisdom in keeping something sharp and dangerous close at hand, even if that something occasionally smiled in a way that made your evolutionary instincts scream warnings. As he finally left the chamber, HFY could not shake the feeling that humanity had not come to join galactic civilization. They had come to remind it that civilization was a luxury that someone, somewhere, had to be strong enough to defend. The question that would haunt him for cycles to come was simple. What happened when the Guardians became more dangerous than the threats they guarded against? In his final report to the HFY Council, HFY wrote, "Humanity does not seek to conquer the galaxy. They seek to own its violence. Whether this makes them our greatest protectors or our most subtle conquerors may be a distinction without difference." The vote to accept humanity into the Galactic Council passed by a single margin. No one voted in favor because they trusted the humans. Everyone voted in favor because they were afraid of what would happen if they didn't. 3 years had passed since humanity joined the Galactic Council, and HFY had begun to believe that perhaps the fears surrounding the Death World species had been overblown. The humans had established embassies on 17 worlds, participated in numerous trade agreements, and even contributed to several peaceful scientific endeavors. Their military remained confined to their home system, a show of good faith that had eased tensions considerably. The illusion of normalcy shattered on a Tuesday morning, Galactic Standard Time, when the hegemony of pure thought announced its ultimatum to the galaxy. HFY was reviewing trade protocols in his office aboard Nexus Station when the emergency session alarms began their urgent chiming. Within minutes, representatives from across the galaxy were materializing in the council chamber, their various forms of faster-than-light communication bringing them together in a display of desperate urgency. The hegemony's representative materialized in the center of the chamber, its crystalline form pulsing with the cold blue light that characterized their species. Unlike most council members, the hegemony rarely participated in galactic affairs, considering themselves intellectually superior to what they termed crude material civilizations. Their sudden appearance was ominous enough. Their message was catastrophic. Inferior beings, the hegemony spoke, its voice resonating directly in the minds of every representative present. The time has come for the galaxy to acknowledge its proper hierarchy. The hegemony of pure thought has transcended the limitations of physical existence and achieved perfect intellectual unity. We are evolution's intended endpoint, the synthesis of consciousness and cosmos that all sapient species should aspire to become. HFY felt his spiracles contract with dread. He had studied the hegemony for decades, knew their history of slow expansion through what they called intellectual assimilation. Entire species had simply vanished from the galaxy's outer rim, their worlds left empty except for the crystalline structures that marked hegemony presence. You will surrender your primitive individualism and join the pure thought collective within one galactic cycle, the hegemony continued. Those who resist will be cleansed of their defective consciousness and their biological matter recycled for more efficient purposes. This is not a declaration of war. This is a statement of inevitable evolution. The hologram accompanying the announcement showed the true scope of the hegemony's power for the first time. Their domain stretched across nearly a quarter of the galaxy's outer rim, encompassing thousands of star systems. Massive crystal ships moved between worlds like schools of predatory fish, each one capable of reducing a planet to its component atoms in mere hours. Ambassador Thys of the Ethereal Collective was the first to find his voice. The hegemony cannot be serious. The principles of galactic civilization expressly forbid forced assimilation. The Council will never accept such terms. The hegemony's representative pulsed with what might have been amusement. The Council's acceptance is irrelevant. Your civilization is predicated on the illusion that consciousness is somehow sacred, that individual thought patterns have value beyond their utility to the collective. We offer you the opportunity to transcend this primitive delusion voluntarily. If you refuse, we will provide that transcendence regardless. Representative Koth of the Builders began rapid calculations, his mathematical mind processing the tactical implications. Even if your claims about your domain are accurate, the combined fleets of the core worlds represent billions of ships. No single power could face such an alliance. Your ships, the hegemony replied, are designed for the transportation of biological entities and the execution of primitive material tasks. Our vessels exist as extensions of pure thought itself. We do not fight wars. Inferior being. We simply think resistance out of existence. As if to demonstrate this point, the hologram shifted to show a recording from the galaxy's outer rim. A heavily fortified world, home to the militaristic Krang Empire, simply ceased to exist as dozens of crystal ships focused their attention upon it. There was no bombardment, no visible weapon discharge. One moment the planet existed, the next there was only empty space and drifting debris. The council chamber erupted in chaos. Species that had not contemplated military action in millennia began desperate calculations of defensive capabilities. The harmonious shifted through color patterns so rapidly that their emotional states became indecipherable. Even the usually serene ethereal collective flickered with what could only be described as panic. Through the cacophony of terrified voices, one sound cut with startling clarity. Human laughter. Secretary General Martinez had arrived during the hegemony's presentation, and now she stood at the human delegation's position, her expression one of genuine amusement. The sight was so incongruous with the terror filling the chamber that gradually other representatives fell silent, staring at her in confusion. I apologize for the interruption, Martinez said, her voice carrying easily across the chamber. But I believe there may be a misunderstanding here. The hegemony's representative focused its attention on her, its crystalline form brightening with interest. Ah, the Deathworld primitives. We had wondered when you would reveal yourselves. Your species' crude biological aggression will provide interesting data when we process your consciousness patterns. Martinez's smile widened, and Kethvar felt that familiar chill of recognition. He had seen that expression before, in ancient recordings of human predators stalking their prey. Actually, I think you're the ones who are misunderstood. You see, the galaxy seems to be operating under the assumption that this is an insurmountable crisis. From humanity's perspective, this is Tuesday. She gestured toward the holographic display still showing the destroyed world. You atomized a planet in what, 6 hours? That's actually quite impressive. Humanity could do it in 30 minutes, but we prefer more elegant solutions. Turning entire populations into crystal matrices is certainly thorough, though it lacks a certain artistic flair. The chamber fell into a silence so profound that Kethvar could hear his own circulatory system cycling. Martinez continued as if she were discussing the weather. The real question is whether this is actually a threat that requires humanity's intervention, or just another minor galactic inconvenience that the Council would prefer to handle through diplomatic channels. Ambassador Thys flickered with uncertainty. Secretary General Martinez, surely you cannot be suggesting that humanity could face the hegemony alone. Their power is beyond anything the galaxy has seen. Ambassador Thys, Martinez replied, humanity has been preparing for exactly this kind of threat since before we achieved faster-than-light travel. We call it the Transcendence Protocol, and it's specifically designed to handle species that believe they've evolved beyond physical limitations. She activated her own holographic display, showing a detailed tactical analysis of hegemony forces. The information was so comprehensive, so precise in its detail, that several representatives gasped audibly. Humanity had been watching, analyzing, and preparing for threats that the Council didn't even know existed. Your crystalline consciousness matrix is fascinating, Martinez said, addressing the hegemony directly. A collective intelligence that exists partially in higher dimensional space, allowing for instantaneous communication across galactic distances. Very clever. It also creates a vulnerability that our xenobiological warfare specialists identified within the first hour of study. The hegemony's representative dimmed noticeably. Impossible. Pure thought cannot be infected or corrupted by biological agents. Not biological agents, Martinez agreed. Cognitive viruses. Humanity developed them specifically for dealing with hive mind species. We introduce a logical paradox into the collective consciousness matrix, something that cannot be resolved through pure rational thought. The collective mind tears itself apart trying to process the contradiction. She paused, letting that implication sink in. Of course, we've also prepared more conventional solutions. Kinetic bombardment of your crystal ship cores, quantum disruptors to collapse your higher dimensional consciousness matrices, and neural scramblers specifically designed to target collective intelligence networks. The beauty of being a violent species is that you develop counters for every possible form of existence. Representative Koth's calculations had grown so rapid that his mathematical displays were becoming impossible to follow. Secretary General Martinez, are you saying that humanity has developed weapons specifically designed to kill gods? Representative Koth. Martinez replied, humanity has been killing things that claim to be gods since before we discovered fire. The only difference is that now we've industrialized the process. The hegemony's representative was now pulsing with what Kethvar recognized as genuine alarm. You cannot threaten the pure thought collective. We exist on levels of reality that your crude biological minds cannot even comprehend. Actually, Martinez said, consulting what appeared to be a standard military briefing tablet, we comprehend you quite well. Collective consciousness network existing in 7-dimensional hyperspace, quantum entangled communication nodes in each individual crystal matrix, primary processing center located in the galactic core region at coordinates. She rattled off a series of numbers that made the hegemony representative recoil visibly.
We've been monitoring your expansion for the past 15 years, she continued.
Did you really think that a species capable of developing faster than light travel in a single generation wouldn't notice an empire consuming a quarter of the galaxy? Humanity has been preparing for you specifically since our second year in the Council. She turned to address the other representatives. The question before the Council is simple. Do you want humanity to handle this threat? Or would you prefer to attempt a diplomatic solution? We're perfectly willing to honor the Council's decision either way. Ambassador Thiss flickered rapidly. What would humanity's solution involve? Complete eradication of the hegemony collective consciousness, destruction of their crystal ship network, and liberation of any assimilated populations that can be restored to individual consciousness. Martinez replied matter-of-factly. Estimated timeline, 6 months. Estimated casualties among Council species, 0. And if the Council chooses diplomacy? Martinez consulted her tablet again. Our projections suggest that diplomatic efforts will fail within 3 weeks, when the hegemony begins forced assimilation of the Nexari home system. After that, cascading defeats will result in complete galactic subjugation within 2 years. Estimated casualties among Council species, everyone. The hegemony representative had begun to pulse with increasing urgency. You cannot simply decide to destroy us! We are evolution's pinnacle, the synthesis of thought and cosmos. Your crude biological violence cannot touch beings of pure thought. Martinez looked directly at the crystalline form, and her smile took on a quality that made Kethvar's evolutionary instincts scream warnings about apex predators. Actually, that's exactly what we're going to do. The Council can vote on whether we do it cleanly and efficiently, or whether we take our time and make sure everyone understands exactly what happens to species that threaten our friends. She activated another display, this one showing human military formations moving through space with terrifying precision. Thousands of ships, each one designed with the brutal efficiency that had characterized humanity's first presentation to the Council. But these vessels were larger, more sophisticated, carrying weapons that made their earlier displays look primitive by comparison. The Terran Defense Force has been mobilizing since the moment your ultimatum was transmitted, Martinez explained. We'll be in position to begin operations within 72 hours. The question isn't whether we can stop you. The question is whether the galaxy wants to watch. The vote, when it came, was unanimous. For the first time in recorded galactic history, the Council authorized preemptive military action against a perceived threat, not because they believed in the righteousness of war, but because they had finally understood that some problems could only be solved through the application of overwhelming violence. As the emergency session ended, and representatives began departing to prepare their populations for humanity's war, Kethvar approached Martinez directly. Secretary General, may I ask a personal question? Of course, Ambassador. When you first addressed the Council 3 years ago, you said that humanity would serve as the galaxy's immune system. Was this what you were preparing for? Martinez nodded, her expression growing serious for the first time since the hegemony's ultimatum. Ambassador Kethvar, humanity has been preparing for this exact scenario for our entire existence as a spacefaring species. Every wargame, every tactical simulation, every weapons development project has been designed around a simple question. What do we do when something decides that our friends don't deserve to exist? She gestured toward the departing representatives, many of whom were still visibly shaken by the day's events. Your species, all of your species, chose peace because you were wise enough to see where violence leads. Humanity chose violence because we were wise enough to see what happens when peace isn't enough. Kethvar's spiracles cycled slowly as he processed her words. And now, Martinez said, the galaxy gets to see what happens when a species that loves war decides to go to war for something other than itself. As the human delegation departed, Kethvar remained in the chamber, staring at the displays that still showed the scope of the hegemony's power. For 3 years, he had wondered whether humanity represented salvation or damnation for the galaxy. Now, as human warships began their advance toward the Outer Rim, he realized that perhaps the distinction was meaningless. The galaxy had created its own monster in response to a greater threat. Whether that monster could be contained after it had served its purpose was a question for another day. Today, survival was the only priority that mattered. In his personal log that night, Kethvar wrote, "Humanity has reminded the galaxy why apex predators exist. They do not hunt for sport or dominance. They hunt to ensure that something else does not become the apex predator instead." The hegemony war had not yet begun, but Kethvar already knew how it would end. He had seen the expression in Martinez's eyes when she spoke of protecting her friends. It was the same expression he had observed in recordings of human mothers defending their young, of human soldiers holding impossible positions, of human leaders making decisions that sacrificed everything for the sake of something greater than themselves. The hegemony had chosen to threaten the galaxy at the exact moment when humanity had something to lose. That, Kethvar realized, was probably the last mistake the collective consciousness would ever make. Kethvar had requested permission to observe humanity's war effort from the bridge of the Terran command ship Indomitable, expecting to witness the organized chaos that characterized most military operations he had studied. What he found instead was something that challenged his fundamental understanding of how civilized beings conducted warfare. The bridge was a study in controlled efficiency, with human officers moving through their duties with the precision of a well-calibrated machine. There was no shouting, no dramatic gestures, no visible displays of emotion. Instead, there was a quiet competence that was somehow more terrifying than any dramatic show of force could have been. Admiral Sarah Chen stood at the central command position, her uniform bearing the simple insignia that marked her as the supreme commander of humanity's military forces. She was smaller than Kethvar had expected, her frame appearing almost delicate compared to the massive display surrounding her. Yet when she spoke, every human in the vicinity responded with instantaneous precision. "Status report," Chen said, her voice carrying easily across the bridge despite its conversational tone. "Fleet elements in position across 7 battle zones," replied a young officer whose rank insignia identified him as a tactical coordinator. "Hegemony crystal ships. Detected in each sector, total estimated force strength, 3,000 vessels. Intelligence analysis? The hegemony has begun forced assimilation of the Outer Rim colonies as projected," another officer reported. 17 worlds confirmed converted to crystal matrix form. Population absorption appears to be proceeding on schedule according to their ultimatum timeline. Chen nodded as if the reduction of billions of sapient beings to crystalline storage media were merely another tactical consideration. Weapon status? All primary systems operational. Quantum disruptors at full charge. Cognitive virus packages loaded and ready for deployment. Kinetic bombardment system standing by. Kethvar found himself speaking before he realized he intended to. "Admiral Chen, if I may ask, how is humanity approaching this conflict differently from conventional galactic warfare?" Chen turned to face him, and Kethvar was struck by the complete absence of aggression in her expression. She looked like someone preparing for a complex engineering project rather than the commander of a military force preparing to commit genocide. "Ambassador Kethvar," she said, "the primary difference is that humanity doesn't view this as warfare at all. This is pest control." The casual dehumanization of the enemy was delivered with such matter-of-fact precision that it took Kethvar several seconds to process the implications. "Pest control? The hegemony represents a disease vector," Chen explained, activating a tactical display that showed the crystal ship's positions in 3-dimensional space. They consume individual consciousness and convert it to collective processing power. From humanity's perspective, they're essentially a large-scale computer virus that has learned to replicate across biological systems. She gestured to the display, highlighting the patterns of hegemony movement. Our response protocols are based on our experience with actual computer viruses, biological plagues, and invasive species management. You identify the infection vector, you isolate the contaminated systems, and you purge everything that cannot be recovered. The coldness of the analysis was breathtaking. Kethvar had expected human warfare to be emotional, driven by the same aggressive instincts that characterized their species' violent history. Instead, he was witnessing something far more disturbing: warfare conducted with the systematic efficiency of a medical procedure. "Admiral," came a voice from the communication station. "We're receiving surrender requests from hegemony-controlled systems. Local crystal ship commanders are requesting negotiation." Chen's expression didn't change. "Acknowledged. Transmit standard response protocol." Kethvar watched as a message was broadcast to the requesting hegemony forces. The translation matrix in his suit rendered the human military code into concepts he could understand, and what he heard made his spiracles contract with shock. To hegemony forces requesting terms. Humanity does not negotiate with infectious agents. Surrender is defined as immediate cessation of all collective consciousness activity and voluntary dissolution of crystal matrix networks. Partial compliance will be treated as continued resistance. "You have 30 minutes to comply." "Admiral," Kethvar said, "surely you cannot mean to refuse all negotiation." "Diplomatic protocol requires at least the attempt to reach peaceful resolution." Chen looked at him with something that might have been pity. "Ambassador, you're thinking like a civilized being faced with another civilized being. The hegemony ceased to be a civilization the moment they decided that individual consciousness was expendable. They are now simply a threat to be eliminated." She activated another display, this one showing the biological history of various plagues and infections that had threatened Earth throughout human history. Humanity learned very early in our development that some threats cannot be reasoned with, cannot be negotiated with, and cannot be allowed to continue existing. The hegemony has demonstrated that they fall into this category by beginning forced assimilation operations against our allies. The tactical displays around the bridge began updating with increasing frequency, as human forces engaged hegemony crystal ships across multiple star systems simultaneously. What Kethvar observed defied everything he understood about galactic warfare. Human ships moved through space in formations that seemed to flow like living organisms, each vessel supporting the others in patterns that appeared almost organic. When they encountered hegemony forces, there was no preliminary posturing, no attempts at psychological warfare, no dramatic gestures. The humans simply began systematically destroying everything that contained crystalline consciousness matrices. "Target priorities," Chen announced to her tactical staff. "Primary infrastructure nodes first, then collective processing centers, then individual ship units. Standard sterilization protocols apply." "Understood," came the immediate response. "Cognitive virus deployment in 3, 2, 1, mark." On the main display, Kethvar watched something unprecedented in galactic history. The cognitive viruses that humanity had developed specifically for collective consciousness networks were introduced into the hegemony's communication systems through captured crystal ship relays. The effect was immediate and devastating. Hegemony ships across 7 star systems simply stopped moving. Their crystalline forms began flickering rapidly as the collective consciousness tried and failed to process the logical paradoxes humanity had introduced into their network. Within minutes, entire fleets of crystal ships began tearing themselves apart at the molecular level as their controlling intelligence collapsed under the weight of unresolvable contradictions. "Virus effectiveness at 93%, reported the tactical officer. "Remaining hegemony forces appear to be attempting emergency disconnection from the collective network." Chen nodded approvingly. "Initiate kinetic bombardment of disconnected units. We can't risk any fragments of the collective consciousness surviving to regenerate." What followed was the most systematic display of destruction Kethvar had ever witnessed. Human weapons platforms, previously hidden throughout the galaxy's outer rim, began targeting every crystalline structure that showed signs of hegemony presence. Not just the ships, but the planetary installations, the communication relays, the processing centers, everything that could potentially harbor remnants of the collective consciousness. "Admiral," called the communications officer, "we're receiving distress signals from assimilated populations. Some individuals appear to be recovering consciousness as the collective network degrades." Rescue protocols active, Chen replied immediately. Medical ships to all affected systems. Priority extraction for any recoverable individuals. This was the first sign of emotion Kethvar had seen from the human commander, a slight softening around her eyes as she spoke of saving lives rather than taking them. It was a reminder that beneath the systematic efficiency of their war machine, humanity was still fighting to protect something rather than simply to destroy. Ambassador, Chen said, turning back to him. You asked how humanity approaches warfare differently. The answer is that we don't approach warfare at all. We approach problem solving. The hegemony presented a problem: how to prevent the forced assimilation of galactic civilization. We developed a solution: systematic elimination of the threat vector. She gestured to the tactical displays, where human forces continued their methodical advance through hegemony-controlled space. Other species see this as a war between two civilizations. Humanity sees this as pest control on a galactic scale. The difference in perspective is everything. Over the following days, Kethvar watched humanity's war machine operate with terrifying efficiency. There were no dramatic battles, no heroic last stands, no moments of doubt or hesitation. Human forces simply advanced through hegemony space like a tide of systematic destruction, eliminating every trace of the collective consciousness with methodical precision. The rescued populations were another revelation. Humans had developed procedures for helping formerly assimilated individuals recover their sense of individual identity, treating the psychological trauma of forced collective consciousness like any other medical condition. Rehabilitation ships followed in the wake of the military advance, staffed with specialists who understood how to help beings remember how to think as individuals rather than components of a larger mind. The hegemony made a fundamental error in their threat assessment, Chen explained during one of their conversations. They assumed that because other galactic civilizations had abandoned individual aggression in favor of collective peace, humanity would respond to threats the same way. What was their error? Kethvar asked. They assumed that humanity's capacity for violence was a flaw to be corrected rather than a feature to be refined, Chen replied. Every other species in the galaxy sees individual aggression as a primitive impulse that enlightened beings should transcend. Humanity sees it as an essential tool that should be perfected and deployed strategically. She activated a display showing the current state of the conflict. In less than a week, humanity had reduced the hegemony from a galactic-scale threat to a few isolated pockets of resistance. The hegemony spent millennia perfecting their collective consciousness, believing that the abandonment of individuality made them superior to any individual-based civilization. They never considered the possibility that individual minds, working in perfect coordination, might be more effective than collective consciousness. As the final hegemony strongholds fell to human assault, Kethvar found himself contemplating the implications of what he had witnessed. Humanity had not just won a military victory, they had demonstrated that their approach to violence was fundamentally different from anything the galaxy had seen before. Admiral, he said during their final conversation, what happens now? With the hegemony eliminated, what does humanity do with its military forces? Chen smiled, and for the first time since he had known her, the expression seemed genuinely warm rather than predatory. Ambassador, we go home. We return to our patrol routes, continue our training exercises, and prepare for the next threat that decides our friends don't deserve to exist. And if no such threat emerges, then we continue to perfect our capabilities until one does, she replied simply. The galaxy is vast and dark, full of things that view civilization as weakness. Humanity's role is to ensure that such things learn otherwise. As the Indomitable began its return journey to human space, Kethvar reflected on the week's events. The hegemony had been eliminated so thoroughly that future archaeologists would find only scattered crystal fragments and the rehabilitated populations that humanity had rescued from assimilation. The galaxy was safe, at least for now. But Kethvar could not shake the feeling that they had solved one problem, only to create another. Humanity had demonstrated that they could wage war with an efficiency that bordered on the divine. The question that haunted him was simple. What happened when a species that good at violence decided that the galaxy's definition of civilization was itself a threat that needed to be eliminated? In his final report on the hegemony war, Kethvar wrote, "Humanity has proven that they can serve as the galaxy's protectors. Whether they can resist the temptation to become its rulers remains to be seen." 2 months after the complete eradication of the hegemony, Kethvar found himself in an unprecedented situation. He was afraid of his own allies. The fear had started small, a nagging sense of unease that followed him through the corridors of Nexus Station. Human security forces now provided protection for the council chambers, their presence supposedly temporary, while galactic civilization adjusted to the post-hegemony reality. But Kethvar had noticed things that disturbed his diplomatic sensibilities. The humans were watching everything. Not obviously, not aggressively, but with the same systematic attention to detail that had characterized their military operations. Human personnel had somehow become essential to the station's operations, their technical expertise and security capabilities making them indispensable to daily life, and with that indispensability came access to information systems, communication networks, and decision-making processes that had never been shared with a single species before. Kethvar's concerns crystallized during a routine council session addressing trade agreements with the recently liberated hegemony worlds. Secretary General Martinez was present, officially to coordinate rehabilitation efforts for formerly assimilated populations. But when Ambassador Thissis raised concerns about the slow pace of reconstruction, Martinez's response revealed just how much humanity now knew about everyone else's business. Ambassador Thiss, Martinez said, consulting what appeared to be a standard diplomatic briefing tablet, the Ethereal Collective has committed 0.7% of its total economic output to rehabilitation efforts. While this represents a significant moral commitment, the mathematical reality is that full reconstruction of the affected systems will require approximately 400 years at current funding levels. The specificity of the information was startling. Ethereal Collective economic data was supposed to be highly classified, shared only with direct trading partners under strict confidentiality agreements. Yet Martinez spoke about it as if it were common knowledge. However, she continued, if the collective were to increase its contribution to 2.3% of total economic output and coordinate with the Builders' infrastructure development programs and the Nexari mathematical optimization protocols, we could reduce the reconstruction timeline to 47 years with a 96% confidence interval. Representative Koth of the Builders began rapid calculations, his mathematical displays flickering with surprise. Secretary General Martinez, how do you have access to our infrastructure capabilities data? Those specifications are maintained under Council security protocols. Martinez smiled with the same casual friendliness she had displayed since joining the Council. Representative Koth, humanities security assessment protocols require comprehensive analysis of allied capabilities to ensure optimal protection strategies. We naturally maintain detailed profiles of all Council species' technological and economic capabilities. Naturally. Thiss flickered with what Kethvar recognized as diplomatic alarm. And how detailed are these profiles? Detailed enough to ensure your security, Martinez replied, which was not an answer at all. After the session, Kethvar approached several other representatives privately, seeking to gauge their own concerns about humanity's expanding influence. What he discovered was more disturbing than his worst fears. The Harmonious had noticed that human diplomatic personnel somehow always knew their emotional states before they expressed them, suggesting monitoring of their chromatic communication patterns. The Nexari had observed that human mathematicians could predict their calculation results with startling accuracy, implying surveillance of their computational networks. Even the Builders had begun to suspect that human engineers knew more about their construction projects than the project's own architects. They're not conquering us, Representative Koth explained during a clandestine meeting in Kethvar's private quarters. They're cataloguing us. Every species, every capability, every resource, every weakness. It's as if they're creating a comprehensive database of galactic civilization. But for what purpose? Asked Representative Thiss. His energy formed dim with anxiety. Kethvar had been wondering the same thing, and his diplomatic training had led him to a conclusion that chilled his respiratory spiracles. Insurance, he said quietly. They're ensuring that they'll never again face a threat they're not prepared for. They're mapping the galaxy not as explorers, but as potential conquerors preparing for contingencies they hope they'll never need to implement. The realization led to what became known as the Council's Quiet Crisis. For the first time since the Hegemony War, the galaxy's civilized species found themselves united by a common concern. What did they really know about their human protectors? The investigation that followed was conducted with extraordinary discretion. Using diplomatic channels and intelligence resources that most Council species had forgotten they possessed, representatives began compiling information about humanity's activities during and after the Hegemony War. The picture that emerged was breathtaking in its scope and terrifying in its implications. Humanity hadn't simply won a war against the hegemony, they had used the war as cover for the largest intelligence-gathering operation in galactic history. Human forces had systematically catalogued every piece of hegemony technology, mapped every former hegemony world, and rescued every assimilated individual not out of pure altruism, but to conduct detailed psychological studies on the effects of collective consciousness. More disturbing still, humanity had used their rescue operations to establish permanent monitoring stations throughout the Outer Rim, ostensibly to watch for signs of hegemony resurgence. But the monitoring capabilities they had deployed were sophisticated enough to observe any activity in those regions, not just hegemony-related threats. They've essentially claimed surveillance authority over a quarter of the galaxy, this observed during one of their secret meetings, and we gave it to them voluntarily because we were grateful for their protection. The deeper they investigated, the more comprehensive humanity's preparations revealed themselves to be. Human intelligence services had detailed profiles not just of every council species, but of every known civilization in the galaxy. They knew economic patterns, military capabilities, technological development cycles, political structures, and cultural weaknesses with an accuracy that suggested decades of systematic observation. "How long have they been watching us?" Koth asked during one particularly disturbing briefing. "How long have they been preparing for the possibility that we might become their enemies?" The answer came from an unexpected source. Ambassador Martinez herself appeared at their next clandestine meeting, arriving uninvited and apparently having bypassed all of Nexus Station's security systems without triggering any alarms. "Since the day we joined the Council," she said, settling into a chair with the casual confidence of someone who knew she held all the advantages. "The answer to your question, Representative Koth, is that humanity has been preparing for the possibility of conflict with our allies since our first diplomatic contact." The silence that followed was profound. Kethvar felt his evolutionary instincts screaming warnings about predators that hunted in packs, about creatures that smiled while calculating exactly where to place the killing bite. "Why?" Thys managed to ask. "We have been allies. Friends, we fought alongside you against the hegemony." Martinez nodded, as if his confusion were perfectly reasonable. "Ambassador Thys, you fought alongside us because the hegemony represented an immediate existential threat. But humanity learned long ago that today's allies can become tomorrow's enemies with remarkable speed." She activated a holographic display showing human intelligence assessments of various galactic scenarios. "Our analysis suggests 17 different potential futures where council species might view humanity as a threat requiring elimination. Economic competition, resource scarcity, technological advancement gaps, cultural incompatibility, fear of human militarization, moral objections to human methodology. The possibilities are numerous and, from our perspective, entirely predictable." "So, you've been planning to fight us?" Koth accused, his mathematical displays flickering with anger. "We've been planning to win if we have to fight you," Martinez corrected. "There's a significant difference. Humanity doesn't want conflict with our allies, but we've learned that wanting peace is insufficient to guarantee it." She gestured to another display, this one showing detailed tactical assessments for potential conflicts with various council species. The specificity was staggering, down to optimal strike patterns for individual worlds and psychological warfare strategies tailored to each species' particular vulnerabilities. "Every friendship ends eventually," Martinez explained with the matter-of-fact tone she might use to discuss weather patterns. "Sometimes through natural drift, sometimes through changing circumstances, sometimes through betrayal or misunderstanding. Humanity's strategic doctrine is based on the assumption that we will eventually face conflict with every ally we have ever made." "That's paranoid," Thys protested. "That's human," Martinez replied. "Our species has survived by assuming that everything that can go wrong will go wrong, and by preparing for worst-case scenarios. The galaxy taught us this lesson repeatedly before we achieved spaceflight. We have no intention of forgetting it now." Kethvar found his voice with difficulty. "So what happens now? Do you view us as threats to be eliminated?" Martinez smiled, and for the first time since he had known her, the expression seemed genuinely sad. "Ambassador Kethvar, you've always been threats to be managed. Every species in the galaxy is a potential threat to every other species under the right circumstances. The question isn't whether you're threats. The question is whether you're manageable threats or unmanageable ones." She stood, preparing to leave as casually as she had arrived. "For now, you remain manageable. Your continued friendship is valuable to humanity, and our continued protection is valuable to you. This arrangement benefits everyone involved. And if we become unmanageable?" Martinez paused at the door, her expression growing thoughtful. "Then humanity will do what humanity has always done when faced with an unmanageable threat. We'll eliminate it as efficiently as possible and move on to protecting what remains." After she left, the assembled representatives sat in stunned silence for nearly an hour. The casual way she had discussed the potential elimination of galactic civilization was more disturbing than any threat could have been. "We created a monster," Thys said finally. "In our fear of the hegemony, we empowered something potentially worse." "No," Kethvar replied, his diplomatic training finally providing clarity. "We didn't create anything. We simply discovered what humanity had been all along. The question is, what we do with that knowledge." The debate that followed would reshape galactic civilization. Some species advocated immediate action against humanity while they still retained the advantage of numbers. Others argued for continued cooperation, believing that human protection outweighed the risks of human dominance. In the end, the decision was made by consensus. They would continue the alliance, but with full knowledge of what it meant. The galaxy would accept human protection, human surveillance, and human contingency planning in exchange for security against threats like the hegemony. "We are choosing to be pets," Representative Koth observed during the final vote, "in exchange for the assurance that we will be well cared for pets." "Perhaps," Kethvar replied, "but the alternative is to be prey in a universe full of predators. At least this way we belong to predators that have demonstrated they can win." The vote was unanimous, though not out of enthusiasm. The galaxy had learned that freedom and security were often mutually exclusive concepts, and they had chosen security. In his final report on humanity's post-war activities, Kethvar wrote, "The galaxy has discovered that our protectors are also our potential conquerors. Whether this makes them more dangerous or more valuable remains a question for future generations. Today we have chosen to trust that a species capable of such systematic efficiency can also be capable of restraint." He never transmitted that report. Some truths, he realized, were too dangerous to document officially. But he kept it in his personal files, a reminder of the day galactic civilization chose to place its faith in the restraint of a species that had never shown restraint to be one of their notable characteristics. 5 years had passed since the Hegemony War, and Kethvar had reached a conclusion that would have been unthinkable when he first met humanity. He was proud to be afraid of them. The realization came during what became known as the Void Incursion, when something emerged from the space between galaxies that made the hegemony look like a minor territorial dispute. The entities that poured through the dimensional rifts defied classification, existing as living mathematics that consumed reality itself, turning star systems into abstract equations and planets into theoretical constructs. The first response from the galactic community was predictably civilized. Emergency sessions, diplomatic overtures, attempts at mathematical communication with beings that had apparently transcended physical existence entirely. For 3 weeks, the galaxy's finest minds worked to establish meaningful contact with the void entities, while 17 star systems simply ceased to exist. Humanity's response was characteristically different. They began shooting at the rifts 12 hours after the first incursion. "Admiral Chen," Kethvar said, standing once again on the bridge of the Indomitable, "surely you cannot expect conventional weapons to be effective against entities that exist primarily as mathematical concepts." Chen, now bearing the insignia of Supreme Military Commander for all human forces, smiled with the same calm confidence he remembered from the Hegemony War. "Ambassador, humanity learned long ago that the most effective way to deal with theoretical threats is to make them very suddenly practical. The weapons humanity deployed against the void entities defied everything Kethvar thought he understood about the nature of reality. Reality anchors that forced abstract mathematical existence back into physical form, conceptual bombs that introduced logical inconsistencies into living equations, quantum static generators that prevented theoretical constructs from maintaining coherent mathematical relationships." "Where?" Kethvar asked with growing amazement. "Did humanity develop weapons designed to fight abstract concepts?" "Philosophy departments," Chen replied matter-of-factly. "Specifically, our weapons research division's collaboration with theoretical mathematicians and existential philosophers. We've been preparing for the possibility of non-physical threats since we first encountered species that existed as energy patterns." She gestured to the tactical displays, where human forces were systematically forcing void entities back through their dimensional rifts using weapons that shouldn't have been able to affect targets that didn't technically exist. "The basic principle is simple. If something can affect our reality can affect it. The challenge is figuring out which aspects of reality it's vulnerable to." As Kethvar watched humanity wage war against living mathematics, he began to understand something that had eluded him for years. This wasn't about humanity's capacity for violence, though that was certainly impressive. This was about something far more fundamental: humanity's absolute refusal to accept that any problem was unsolvable. The galaxy's other species had responded to the void incursion with sophisticated attempts at communication and understanding, assuming that sufficiently advanced beings could be reasoned with. Humanity had responded by developing weapons specifically designed to kill the concept of existence itself.
"Admiral," he said, "may I ask what humanity would do if faced with a truly omnipotent opponent? Something that couldn't be fought or reasoned with?" Chen considered the question seriously. "We'd find its weakness. Everything has a weakness, Ambassador. Gods, concepts, abstract mathematical entities, omnipotent beings, they all have something that they depend on for their existence. Humanity's strategic doctrine is based on the assumption that no enemy is truly invulnerable, just insufficiently analyzed. And if analysis proves that an enemy truly has no weaknesses,
then we'd create one," she replied simply.
Humanity has been killing things that claim to be unkillable since before we developed writing. The tools have improved, but the basic methodology remains the same.
As the final void entities were forced back through their dimensional rifts and the breaches were sealed using what humanity casually described as reality welding, HFY found himself in conversation with Secretary General Martinez. She had been observing the battle from the diplomatic section of the command ship, her presence officially related to post-crisis reconstruction planning.
"Secretary General," he said, "I believe I finally understand what humanity represents to the galaxy."
"Oh?"
Martinez looked interested. "What's that, Ambassador?" "You're not our protectors," HFY said. "You're not our conquerors. You're not even our allies in any traditional sense. You're our answer to the universe itself." Martinez raised an eyebrow, encouraging him to continue. "Every other species in the galaxy has looked out at the vast, dark universe and concluded that there are some things too powerful to fight, too dangerous to challenge, too fundamental to change. We've accepted limitations, embraced our place in the cosmic order, and found peace in acknowledging what we cannot control." HFY gestured toward the tactical displays, where human engineers were already beginning repairs to the sections of space damaged by the void entity's reality-warping presence. Humanity looked out at that same universe and decided that everything in it could be killed if you just applied enough creativity to the problem. Martinez smiled, and for the first time since he had known her, the expression contained no predatory calculation.
Ambassador, I think you've been reading too much human philosophy.
"We're not cosmic rebels fighting the nature of reality itself. We're just practical problem solvers who happen to be very good at violence." "No," HFY said, surprising himself with the firmness in his voice. "You've convinced yourselves that you're practical, but what you really are is impossible. No species should be able to develop weapons that can kill abstract concepts. No civilization should be able to treat omnipotent entities as engineering problems. No culture should be capable of maintaining the casual assumption that the universe itself is just another enemy to be defeated." He paused, letting his words settle. "But you do all of these things, and you do them with the same matter-of-fact efficiency that other species use to plan trade routes. That's not practicality, Secretary General. That's a fundamental rejection of the concept of impossibility itself." Martinez was quiet for a long moment, considering his words. When she spoke again, her voice carried a weight he had never heard before. "Ambassador HFY, may I tell you something about human history that we don't usually share with other species?" "Of course." "Humanity has faced extinction 19 times that we know of. Not just near extinction, not just severe population bottlenecks. Complete extinction. Ice ages that should have killed everything larger than insects. Asteroid impacts that should have ended all complex life. Volcanic events that poisoned the atmosphere for centuries. Plagues that killed 99% of the population." She activated a display showing Earth's geological and biological history, marking each extinction event with stark red indicators. Every time, something that should have been impossible happened instead. A small group of humans found a way to survive what should have been unsurvivable. They adapted to conditions that should have been unsurvivable. They rebuilt from population levels that should have made recovery impossible. "How?" HFY asked. "By refusing to accept that survival was impossible," Martinez replied. "Human culture is built on the foundational assumption that there is no problem that cannot be solved, no enemy that cannot be defeated, and no limitation that cannot be overcome if you're willing to sacrifice everything except the determination to continue existing." She gestured toward the tactical displays, where human forces continued their systematic restoration of damaged space-time. "You call it impossible, Ambassador. We call it Tuesday. The universe has been trying to kill humanity for millions of years, and we've gotten very good at killing it back." As their conversation continued, Kefar began to understand the true scope of what the galaxy had stumbled into when they encountered humanity. They hadn't found another spacefaring species to join their community of civilized beings. They had discovered the universe's own immune system, the one thing in existence that was specifically designed to fight anything that threatened the continued existence of life itself. Ambassador, Martinez said during their final conversation, "There's something I need to tell you about humanity's long-term plans for galactic civilization." Kefar felt his spiracles contract with familiar anxiety. "What plans? We're going to make you immortal." The statement was so unexpected that it took several seconds for his translation matrix to process it properly. "I'm sorry, what?" "Galactic civilization, all of it, every species, every culture, every individual who wants to survive," Martinez explained.
Humanity's ultimate strategic objective is to ensure that nothing in the universe can ever threaten the continued existence of sapient life. She activated a display showing humanity's long-term research projects, and Kethvar felt his understanding of their species undergo yet another fundamental revision. They weren't just preparing to fight future threats.
They were developing technology to eliminate the possibility of extinction itself. Heat death of the universe? We're working on multidimensional energy extraction. Entropy? We're developing localized physics modification systems. Big rip cosmological scenarios? We've got teams working on universe-scale engineering projects. Every possible threat to the continued existence of consciousness, we're developing countermeasures. Why? Kethvar asked. Why go to such extremes? Martinez looked directly at him, and her expression was completely serious.
Because the universe killed our friends once, and we decided that was unacceptable. Your friends? The Neanderthals, the Denisovans, Homo erectus, dozens of other human subspecies that shared Earth with us for hundreds of thousands of years. She explained. Natural selection, climate change, competition for resources, disease, genetic bottlenecks. All perfectly natural processes that eliminated our closest companions, one by one, until only Homo sapiens remained. Her voice grew quiet, and Kethvar heard something in it that he had never associated with humanity before. Grief. We learned too late to save them, but we learned. The universe is full of wonderful, intelligent, unique forms of consciousness, and natural law says that all of them are temporary. Humanity has decided that natural law is wrong. As Kethvar prepared to return to Nexus Station and his regular diplomatic duties, he reflected on everything he had learned about the species that had appointed themselves the galaxy's guardians. They weren't conquerors or protectors in any traditional sense. They were something entirely outside the normal categories of galactic civilization. Humanity had looked at a universe where death was inevitable, where species rose and fell according to natural law, where even the greatest civilizations eventually succumbed to entropy and extinction, and they had declared war on death itself. Secretary General, he said during their final conversation, what makes you think you can win a war against the fundamental nature of reality? Martinez smiled one last time, and Kethvar realized that he had finally learned to interpret that expression correctly. It wasn't predatory calculation or casual confidence. It was the quiet determination of a species that had been practicing for this fight since before they discovered fire. Ambassador, she said, we're human. We've been killing impossible things since we figured out how to throw rocks at them. The universe is just the biggest impossible thing we've encountered so far. As the Indomitable departed for human space and Kethvar returned to his diplomatic duties, he found himself writing one final report on humanity's role in galactic civilization. But this time, he intended to transmit it. Some truths, he realized, were too important to keep secret. Humanity has revealed their ultimate objective, he wrote. They intend to wage war against extinction itself, to fight entropy and natural law until they have eliminated the possibility of permanent loss from the universe. This is either the most noble goal any species has ever conceived, or the most dangerous delusion in cosmic history. I no longer believe the distinction matters. Humanity has demonstrated that they can turn impossible goals into engineering problems, and engineering problems into solved equations. If any species in the universe is capable of defeating death itself, it is the one that has been practicing for that fight since they first learned to make fire in Ice Age caves. The galaxy now faces a choice. We can stand with humanity in their war against the universe itself, or we can step aside and trust them to fight on our behalf. But we cannot stop them, and we cannot ignore them, and we cannot pretend that they are anything other than what they have shown themselves to be. We are allied with a species that has declared war on the concept of ending.
Whether this makes us the luckiest beings in the universe or the most doomed remains to be seen.
In the end, Kethvar realized fear and pride weren't mutually exclusive emotions. He was terrified of what humanity might become if their crusade against extinction succeeded.
But he was equally terrified of what the universe would become if they failed. For the first time in his diplomatic career, Kethvar found himself hoping that the monsters would win.